Without a doubt, the hardest part about getting great mixes is the part that we all practice and talk about the least. So today, I'm going to attempt to give you a crash course. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, I'm Cool Caparoon. Thank you for stopping by for another video. Now, for years, I would hear my favorite mixer, which was Chris Lord-Alge back in the day. I would hear these CLA mixes in like the late 2000s, early 2010s, and just be like, how on earth do those mixes sound like that? It must be his rack of compressors behind him. It must be his SSL mixing console. It must be his skill set. It must be something that I don't have. And after years of experimenting, which was great, years of experimenting and learning different techniques, growing as a mixer, I went and saw Chris Lord-Alge at Sweetwater, actually, in the Sweetwater Theater, where he was giving a presentation on some new plugin or something. This was maybe 2011, maybe somewhere around 2011. And he brought with him the raw tracks from Green Day's American Idiot. Now, this was the first time that I had ever heard raw tracks from such a huge, great sounding record before. And there was one thing that stood out to me that absolutely blew my mind. And it's that the raw tracks with zero processing sounded better than anything I had ever mixed before in my life. I was completely blown away. How could something that had not been mixed sound so incredible? How could something that had not been run through a rack of 1176s and mixed on an SSL 4K console, how could it sound so finished? And it was a big light bulb moment for me in my career that the mix only is as good as the arrangement of the song and how well the song was tracked. Those are actually the things that limit how good a mix can be. Now, of course, there's a lot that happens in a mix that we can do to shape and mold a mix and make the mix sound better than the production has any business being. But the limiting factor of how good a mix can be is how good it was recorded and arranged. Now, I've got a ton of videos on this channel about tracking and about recording hacks. I'll try to link some of them down below in the links in the description down below. I've got vocal hacks and recording hacks and different techniques and all kinds of how to record acoustic guitar, all kinds of stuff. But those videos never perform. Nobody watches those videos. And it's because it's not the sexy thing to talk about. We have, as a society, have like, as a musical society, have like romanticized mixing to the point where we have ignored all of the fundamentals. But without all of those fundamentals, your mixes are gonna suck. And so when you're done with this video, be sure to go hit all the links in the description below. But let me try to give you a crash course. Now, there's a thing that I've been saying for a long time. And it's that if you take a microphone and you move a microphone this much, that is a bigger difference than the microphone that you're using or the compressor that you're using or the treatment that you give it in the mix after the fact. Taking a microphone and moving it that much is the biggest difference you can possibly make inside making music. And so when you're recording something, anything, play around with mic placement. Really spend the time and see how finished you can get it sounding. Because this is like free EQ. This is like free compression, which means EQ and compression without penalties is what that actually means. So if you can position this in a way where you don't need EQ or you need less EQ or you need less compression, then you're going to be miles ahead in the mix when it actually comes time to mix. But let's start with vocals because that's what everyone records is vocals. We'll get back into some other instruments here shortly. This is a vocal mic. There are differences in microphones for sure. So one of the things that I do want to get out of the way is if you have several different microphones, if you have a couple, it doesn't matter if one is better than the other. It doesn't matter if you have two cheap vocal mics and one really expensive vocal mic. When you start working with a new singer, be sure that you make them sing through every vocal mic that you have. Because what you'll find is one of them is going to fit that singer better than the others. And it might not be the most expensive one. So this is something that I do for every single singer, no matter what. I will say at this point, I've recorded so many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of singers that just by the character of their voice, I kind of have an idea which microphone is going to work best for them. But if you're unsure, you really should test different microphones out. Next up, proximity effect. When it comes to recording vocals, proximity effect means the closer you are to the microphone, the more low end it has. And the further away you are from the microphone, the less low end it has. So be sure to place the singer or the microphone so that way it has the appropriate amount of low end for the voice that you're trying to capture. Remember, this is free EQ. So if the voice is a little thin and harsh sounding, get that microphone closer. If the voice is a little boomy and muddy sounding, pull the microphone away. If the voice is a little too pointy and a little too mid-rangey, and if you're having some problem with sibilance, rotate the mic like this. So that way it's rotating it off axis. And the more you rotate it off axis, the softer the sound will become. And oftentimes, the less sibilance there will be. Again, this is free EQ. If you're recording acoustic instruments, same thing applies. The closer the microphone is to the source, the more low end it has. The further away it is, the less low end it has. But as you keep moving further away, the top end also starts to roll off. This is free compression. So if your microphone is fairly far away from the source, the further away it is, the more air the sound has to travel through to reach the microphone. And sound naturally gets compressed as it travels through longer distances of air. You'll also hear a slight top end roll off the further away you are, so play around with that position. And then when I'm recording any acoustic instrument whatsoever, I showed it off recently in a video, I will put the microphone up, and if I'm playing acoustic guitar, electric, dobro, like literally any acoustic instrument, I will move in relationship to that microphone and find the place. I'll scoot forward and back, and I will literally move around and find the place in the headphones where it sounds the absolute best. Once I've found that, I don't move. Electric guitars, when you're miking up a speaker or bass guitar, same difference. Any sort of speaker that you're miking up, like on guitar amps, the closer you are to the center of the speaker, the more scratchy and high-endy the sound is going to be, and the more you move towards the outside of the speaker, the more like mid-rangey it's going to be, and the less full character it's going to be. So you find your sound that you want. This is free EQ. You find your sound you want by placing the microphone somewhere between the center of the speaker and all the way to the edge of the surround. And you move that back and forth until you find the sound that you're looking for, so that way you can EQ it less. This is a mass generalization, but when you're recording drums, the more the microphone is pointed towards the edge of the drum head, towards the outside of it, the more tone and resonance you're going to pick up. And the more you angle the microphone or point the microphone towards the center of the drum head, like where the stick is, the more attack you're going to get from that drum sound. So you want to play around with that and find the right balance between attack and resonance. In addition, same thing is true for drums. If you're on a tom or a snare and that microphone is really close to that head, then you're going to get a lot of proximity effect. It's going to sound thicker if you start pulling it away. And I'm talking half-inch movements at a time. As you move this microphone, it is going to sound shockingly different. So the thicker you want it, the closer it needs to be. The more overall tone that you want, the further away you want it to be. The more resonance you want, the closer to the edge you want it to be. And the more attack you want, the more you want it pointed towards where the stick hits the drum. Now, those are just the basics, because there's a lot of techniques. Spaced pairs, X, Y, Blumen pairs, like there's so many different techniques. Spend some time experimenting and figuring out the sounds that you like. One of the things that I used to do back in the day is I would have the drummer load in the night before. This was back when I had my own space and I was tracking drums in my own studio, but I would have the drummer load in the night before, and we would take however long it took to get the drum sounds that I was happy with, that I wanted for that record. And I didn't charge them for this. I would spend sometimes 4 or 5 hours dialing in drum tones. But guess what? The next day we would come in with fresh perspective, well rested. We would come in the next day. The drummer's no longer frustrated from how long I spent making him hit a snare drum. But we would come in the next day and track everything, and the drum sounds were incredible because I had spent so much of my own time not charging the client, finding the right drum sounds, experimenting with those microphone differences, experimenting with the room microphones, the overhead microphones. The arrangement of a song is just as important. If you have a bass guitar and a bass synth and an organ and a pad and a baritone guitar and, you know, all of these instruments that are centered around this like low and low mid range, it's not going to work. There's too much down there. And in the mix, you're going to find yourself boosting a bunch of upper, mid-range, and top end to try to compensate for the fact that in the arrangement, the parts that were played and the instruments that were used were all too focused around a single frequency spectrum. Instead, do a bass guitar and a bass synthesizer. Make sure you choose one of them to live below the other one. Bass synthesizers usually work better in lower frequencies than bass guitars, so I like having a bass synthesizer below my bass guitar. Up from that might be a baritone or might be an electric guitar, but choose that, and then the part that it plays has to complement the next guitar that is just a little bit higher in the frequency spectrum. And then maybe there's an acoustic guitar that adds some shimmer and some shine above that, and then maybe there's a pad or a synthesizer with a very sizzly top end that lives above that. When you're laying out the parts to be played in a song, and when you're laying out what parts the instruments that are there should play, be sure you are very conscious of how they all fit together. They all need to complement each other, so that way when the whole mix is playing, it's taking up the full frequency spectrum. You're not piling a bunch of stuff on top of one frequency spectrum while leaving big holes in another frequency spectrum. This is just a tiny scratch of the surface for how to set up the arrangement within your song, but play around with these principles. And I promise you, when you start nailing all this stuff, when you start dialing in your microphone placement, when you start really nailing the arrangement of a song, your mixes are going to sound great. And here's how I kind of learned that. There would be mixes from time to time that I would do of my own productions, and these mixes would be significantly better than other mixes. And then I would have to stop and analyze it. Why were these better than other mixes? What happened? Did I just happen to EQ that snare drum and that vocal better than all the other mixes, than the last 20 mixes that I have done? Usually not. Usually that's not the case. Did I just happen to choose a different microphone or a different compressor for that vocal, and that's what made the difference? Usually not. That was usually not the case. What I ended up figuring out over years of doing this, of analyzing the stuff that turned out really well, it usually came down to I recorded it really well. That mic placement just happened to be better than what I was doing on average at the time. And the arrangement of the song, the parts that were being played, the instruments that were chosen were more complementary to each other, and they were less piling up on top of each other. I will put links down below to as many videos as I can find on my channel where I talk about tracking or any sort of tracking techniques or showing off any tracking stuff, any sort of mic placement stuff. I'll put a handful of videos down below. So not for me. I'm not asking you to go watch them for me. Go watch them for you, because this is important. This is really, really important stuff. And unfortunately, it doesn't get the attention that it deserves because it's not sexy. Mixing is sexy. Racks of outboard gear with all the lights flashing while we're mixing is sexy. But none of this matters if we don't have the arrangement right and if it wasn't recorded well. I will also put links down below for every piece of gear that I use, all of my favorite gear. There'll be a link in the description down below for. Those links do go to Sweetwater. So anytime you guys need any piece of musical gear whatsoever, you can click on any one of my videos, hit any one of the links in the description. Once you're on the site, you can purchase anything you need. It costs you nothing extra, but it goes a long ways to help support this channel, help me keep making videos like this. So thank you, Sweetwater, for sponsoring this video. And thanks to you guys for hitting those links in the description anytime you need to purchase anything. I really hope that this helped someone. I hope that I know this was just scratching the surface of stuff, but I hope that this made a light bulb go on in your brain. I hope that this gave you a hunger and a desire to dig deeper into how to record and arrange the best music you possibly can. Drop me a comment, let me know, give me a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't yet. If you made it this far into this video and you're not subscribed yet, I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe. We'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.